prelude to an epic operation by the RAF. 18 Mosquitoes of the 2nd Tactical Air Force, including a squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force, carried out the task led by Group Captain Pickard of Target for Tonight fame. It was to prove his last flight. For security reasons, it has not been possible until now to give a full account of this exploit. In the words of the briefing officer, Mosquitoes are to attack the prison at Amiens to assist more than 100 prisoners to escape. These prisoners are French patriots condemned to death for assisting the Allies.
Oh yes, the objective was to release some prisoners from the prison who were in fact part of the French underground movement at the time. Quite a lot of them had been moved into Amiens prison, and we had this request to try to release them. Of course, the first reaction was that we'd probably kill them all in trying to do so. But there was considerable concern in France about their future if they were left in the prison. And I think then the AOC, who was Basil Embry at the time, decided that it would really be worth doing if we could try to knock the walls down without putting in too much explosive. I was involved in the planning, and of course the difficulty was to achieve this kind of success without killing a lot of people. We knew quite a lot about the prison. We'd been provided with the details of the construction, but we weren't quite so happy with the details of the effect of the bombs on that type of construction. It was a very difficult decision on what to drop and how much to drop. Obviously we couldn't drop too little because we could not go back again. The defences would have been improved. If we dropped too much, then we would negate the whole objective. So a very delicate operation. We made the plan, and in fact we should have flown together. I should have flown with Basil Embry on that plan, but the Tactical Air Force Commander, Mary Cunningham, stopped him at the last moment, saying he knew too much about it, and therefore presented a danger if he was shot down early in the raid. I suggested that I might fly with someone else, but was promptly told that since I knew as much, I couldn't go either. So we did the briefing at the airfield and then moved back into the headquarters.
Here is a model of the prison in which the aircraft were on their way to attack. This was used for briefing the crew. At the back, you can see the Albert-Amiens Road, the guide to the target. At each extremity of the prison are the buildings believed to house the Nazi prison guards. The main buildings in the form of a cross housed the French patriots. The task of the first 12 aircraft was to breach the wall in 2 places and to destroy the buildings housing the Nazi prison guards. The remaining 6 aircraft were to bomb the prison out of existence should the first attack be a failure, in which case many of the condemned men might be killed by British bombs instead of Nazi bullets. They would at least have a chance to escape.
About a day before February the 18th, 2 of the 3 of us pilots were told by our squadron commander to take it easy tonight because you'll be flying tomorrow. We had no idea what the target was. We assumed it was another set of marshalling yards or some more flying bomb targets. But the next morning at 8 o'clock, Tannoy went, a certain number of aircrew by name, to report to the briefing room immediately. It was snowing like hell. The cloud base was about 100 feet. I think I said at the time that even the birds were walking. When we got to the briefing room, we all sat down. There was a blanket covering our big map of the French area. And in came Air Vice Marshal Embry, Squadron Leader Sismore carrying a large box, and the Group Captain Pickard. The AOC said, "Gentlemen, we've got another target for you today, and it's an essential target. It's Amiens." And we thought, oh God, the marshalling yards again at Amiens. And he looked at it and he said, "No, gentlemen, not the marshalling yards, it's the prison at Amiens." And he took the lid off the box, and they took the cover off the big map. And then we were briefed the reason why we were going and how essential it was that it had to be done today. The urgency was it had to be done within 2 or 3 hours. It's as simple as that.
When I got to the door of the briefing room, there was an armed service policeman there who was checking identities. And this was something I hadn't come across before. We'd had rumours over the past few days that there was something special on, and so, I came to the conclusion that this was it. Went into the briefing room, and Group Captain Pickard and Air Vice Marshal Embry both came in, and they talked about the target. Well, there was a large wooden box covering something on the table, and the intelligence officer removed the top of the box to disclose this model of a building, a cross-shaped building with a wall around it. And this was a model of Amiens Prison. We studied the model and they filled in the details of it, where the guards would be at 12 o'clock, because they estimated that if we bombed the eastern end of the main building, at that time the guards would be in having their midday meal, and so it would eliminate some of the guards who might prevent the escape of the prisoners anyway. The plan was for the first 3 aircraft of our Squadron 487 were going to bomb the eastern outer wall. The second 3 were going to turn short of the target, to turn off in a northwesterly direction, and to come in behind us, but turning onto a southerly course so that they could bomb the northern outer wall of the prison. Our bombs had got 11-second fuses on them to give us time and the second 3 to get clear before they went off. The Australian squadron were going to use similar tactics, except that they were going to do it with a shallow dive bombing onto the outer ends of the prison building walls. And their first 3 were going to follow us on the eastern end of the building where the guards were. Their second 3 on the northern wall of the cross-shaped building.
Squadron Leader Sismore briefed us on the route. It was beautifully executed, the route. The Germans would have no idea where we were going until we got there. He pointed out all the flak positions that he knew of, etc., from his vast experience. And then the group captain came up and explained the reason for the raid, that about 100-odd prisoners were going to be shot. People who had looked after us escaping, who provided with intelligence, people who really were essential for the coming up D-Day in a couple of months' time. So we're all fired up about it.
It was quite well planned. It was possibly, we used too much force. We didn't really need to use quite so much, but there was an urgency about it because we were told that there were going to be considerable, almost mass executions in the next few days. So we hadn't much time. When we did it, we had to be pretty certain about having achieved the aim. What we were not told at the time, it was not so much rescuing all these members or putative members of the resistance movement, of which there were over 200, but there were two very key people who'd been taken in without the Germans quite knowing how key they were. There were senior officials in the Calais area. One was a sort of county council chief and that sort of thing, and they were party to the invasion plans, or a part of them. And we didn't know this at the time. We thought this was just a pure rescue act to stop them all being put up against a wall and shot. But in fact, the authorities would have been delighted if we'd killed those two. They were terrified of what they knew, and that their cover had been at least partially blown. As it was, they both got away. Coins were tossed as to, because they decided to use 2 squadrons for the direct operation itself, and 1 squadron in reserve, which would be there hanging about to finish off what if the others didn't achieve their objective. It was an attempt to limit the amount of power that was being used, because the jail was on the edge of a very built-up area of Amiens. And also there were inmates who had nothing to do with the war. And then if any of the things had failed, the 3rd squadron, would, already having divided itself into 4s, would be prepared to have another go at any one of those objectives. And it was a toss of the coin, and unfortunately my squadron commander couldn't toss a coin to save his so we got the reserve job.
At briefing, the crews detailed for the task learned that the prison was not difficult to find. In order to deceive the Germans as to their destination, the aircraft swung north at a given point and flew to Doullens, where they turned south until they hit the main Albert-Amiens road. This road provided an excellent lead into the target, which lay just to the east of the town of Amiens. 0 hour was midday. At this time last February, the prisoners were to be released by the most welcome raid of the war. It was snowing hard as the aircraft flew out from England at 0 feet across the sea towards the French coast. They were picked up by their fighter escort of 2 Typhoons to each aircraft. So bad was the visibility that they had to fly almost wingtip to wingtip. Out over the channel, the snow stopped and the weather improved.
It was an aircraft which was not very forgiving. You had to treat it with respect. It could bite you. It had quite a savage stall. It could be skittish on the ground. Takeoffs and landings, it could swing quite badly, and you had to really be on the ball. But having said all that, it was incredibly manoeuvrable. It was faster at low level than anything the Germans had, even the FW-190. And there was one occasion when I was able to destroy an FW-190 without firing anything, in that he came on my tail, and I was about 500 feet over France. And I went into a spiral, a very steep spiral, which you could do with this aircraft. It was very manoeuvrable indeed. and he must have been young and inexperienced, because he was so intent on getting me in his sights that he flew into the ground. He didn't realise I was going downhill. We all felt secure and masters of our own destinies in that aircraft.
We went out to our aircraft at about 10:15. It was essential that we were at the target at 12 o'clock, because that was when the Marquis were going to be outside the prison. The weather was still just as bad. It was snowing very hard. It was still very dark, and the base of the clouds looked about 50 feet.
The weather in the target area seemed possible, and our weather in England was appalling. Very heavy snow, enormous turbulence, almost line squall quality, and right across the south of England. There was no hope whatsoever of taking off in any sort of formation and maintaining any sort of formation in these cloud conditions. So I decreed that we would take off. So I decreed that 487 Squadron would take off at 5-second intervals individually and fly absolutely strict courses and heights and speeds in this cloud until we popped out the other side of it near Littlehampton, which is what we should do, when, if everyone had flown accurately and timed it accurately, we should all be in sight of each other, and we should be able to join up into the right sort of attack formation. And such was the case. And by the time we arrived over Littlehampton, I had all 6 aircraft in close formation, and but we failed to rendezvous with our fighters. We were supposed to have a fighter escort of Typhoons, and as far as I was concerned, they never appeared.
The wing commander and number 2 went up the runway to take off, and they got to about 50 feet and disappeared into cloud. We then went up the runway, took off, and similarly went into very, very dark cloud. The snow was going horizontally past us, and it was impossible to see anything in front. Maxie and I decided that we wouldn't turn immediately on our ETA at Henley because of the risk of collision, and we would overshoot Henley slightly. We did this keeping a very close lookout to make sure there was nothing in our path, and proceeded down towards Littlehampton. The cloud was still just as thick, the snow was just as heavy, and we saw absolutely nothing. We were in a little world of our own, and I think it must have been somewhere about south of Petworth when the cloud became grey rather than black and lighter, and ultimately, before we reached Littlehampton, we came out into the grey overcast, but out of the snow, out of the cloud surrounding us. The cloud was now all above us, and the ground was visible. We looked out ahead of us, but there wasn't a Mosquito in sight. Thinking we were way behind schedule and we were going to miss our 12 o'clock target time, we increased our speed, but after we'd gone a comparatively short time, I discovered that there was another Mosquito, two in fact, flying on our port side behind, and this turned out to be Wing Commander Smith with number 2. So we got back into formation, went down on the sea, and we went out over the coast, right down on the sea, and out to pick up the G line, the coordinates of which I'd set up on the G set to take us into Tocqueville.
Crossed the channel and flew the route, which was a sort of reverse route, so that we could attack the right walls at the right angles, and that is, we flew round past Amiens, down to Albert, and then up the road from Albert to Amiens. There were no problems going to the target, except the leader of my second section had an engine fail. It was cruel luck. He couldn't keep up on one engine, and although he started it again and tried, it caught fire, and he put it out, it stopped it again, and the fire went out, and he set off home on his own. So I arrived at the target with only 5 aircraft due to this mishap.
We crossed the coast, and we were supposed to go to Doulon and then Senapont, but we shortcut it, and so we reformed at Senapont. We turned there southeastwards to Albert. The visibility at this point was very much improved. There was snow on the ground, but it made things stand out very clearly. The air itself was very clear. It was at this point that a typhoon, which shot straight through the formation. I initially thought it was a Focke-Wulf 190, but was relieved to find that it wasn't when I could get a good view of it.
And so to the target itself. You can see the fighters protecting the bombers fly across our path as we run up to the target. The aircraft carrying the cameras will take you over the target after the first 12 aircraft have bombed, and you'll be able to see how successful they have been.
The plan was that the first 3 aircraft, very tight echelon port formation, overlapping wingtips, would attack the eastern wall, pull up over it, break to starboard, and clear Amiens, leaving it to port. The second section of 3 aircraft, now 2, because of the abort by the leader, were to swing out just short of the target, starboard, and come in on a port turn and attack the northern wall. The leading section, that is my section, would go over the top of them by this time, and they would be passing underneath. We were all armed with 11-second delay 500-pound GP bombs. We did not know how thick the wall was, and 487 Squadron's task was to breach the wall. The whole thing had to be accomplished substantially inside the 11-second time delay on the bombs, otherwise the second section was blown up. So they didn't have to be more than 1 or 2 seconds behind the first section when they crossed. It required very precise and accurate flying on everyone's part.
We had developed a technique of skip bombing by just letting the bombs hit the ground, and we knew, according to the type of surface they hit, how far they'd go and how high they'd go. But unfortunately, when we got over there on this day, there'd been a big snowstorm, and the countryside was white, and we didn't really know how far a bomb might skip on snow. It might go right over the jail into the town. So a rapid redecision was made on the spot that what we were trying to do is chuck them into the wall straight in. And this almost took us back to the days of the anti-shipping strikes. It was a very similar operation, really. And some of the pilots, not very many, but some of the commanding officers of the 2 of the squadrons and the flight commanders had actually been on shipping strikes way back. So it all came home to roost.
We got down to about 50 feet, and I had to, we started to come lower and slower, and I had to keep my wing tilted up a little bit because of poplar trees along the route. But they soon petered out, and we got down really low. I suppose we're only a few knots above stalling speed with a heavy bomb load, and at a height between 10 and 15 feet, we let our bombs go at the eastern wall. I shot up over the wall and looked straight into the guard, face of the guard in the cupola with the machine gun. He was smoking a cigarette. And then I was back onto the deck again on my way out.
And we turned at Albert along the Albert-Amiens road, which is about 7 miles long, I think. And from the moment we turned, I could see the prison buildings standing on the north side of the road. We throttled back to 220 miles an hour and got really down on the ground because the aim was to be below the level of the 20-foot outer wall so that the bombs at the reduced speed and at the lower height would hit the wall, wouldn't go through it, and would explode in the wall. We approached the wall. I then watched the wing commander go. Because we had Mark 6 Mosquitoes, it was impossible to see immediately below. One could only see between the engine nacelle and the top of the bodywork under the canopy. And so I watched the wing commander's bombs, saw a great cloud of red brick dust come up, and knew that his bombs had hit the wall. I looked round, and we were below the level of the main building, but climbing. And I don't think I have ever seen such a long climb to get us over the roof. It seemed to take an extraordinary time. Over the roof, we went down on the other side, back onto the ground, and commenced to come away from the target.
The actual bombing was done by the leader of the section in each case. The other members of the section bombed on his bombs. That is, the moment they saw the bomb release from the wing, then they pressed their bomb release switches. They couldn't possibly look at the target. They had to be looking at the formation leader and depend on him entirely for the accuracy of the bombing, and secondly, to pull up over the building and evade the second section, or the first section, as the case may be. They bombed at very low speed. I can't remember whether it was 160 or 180 miles an hour, but I assessed the speed as the minimum I needed to have sufficient speed to pull up sharply over the wall in the building, since we bombed well below the top of the wall. It was impossible to see any results of our bombing because we had to clear the target area immediately, because 464 Squadron was to be 1 minute behind us to bomb the ends of the building.
As I sped away from the prison, I could see our second section coming into the north wall. There were only 2 aircraft on this because the leader had been hit by flak in the shoulder on his way to the target, and he was limping his way back home on one engine. About halfway to the coast, still maintaining RT silence, there was suddenly a blare on the RT. It was the group captain. "Red, red, red, Daddy, don't bomb." This was to tell the 3rd Squadron of 4 aircraft not to bomb the prison completely.
And here's the shot again, slowed down. There could be no doubt about the success of the attack. As the aircraft ran over the target, the pilot said he could see men running through a large hole where the wall had been breached. And inside the prison, he could see many others in brown dungarees running for the hole in the wall. The Nazi prison guard quarters are covered with smoke from bursting bombs, and the walls have been breached. With amazing skill, the bomb aimers have blown an exit in the main building. Perfect discrimination in this, one of the most difficult operations of the war. The walls are breached and hardly anything is left standing of the prison guards' quarters. Although some of the patriots were killed by German machine guns as well as by bombs, a high percentage escaped. The Germans also suffered casualties from the attack. 2 of the fighter escort and 2 Mosquitoes were lost, one of them Group Captain Pickard's. He died leading probably the most successful operation of his gallant and brilliant career.
Pickard's job in this attack was he flew at the back of 464 Squadron, was to go round the target after 464 had bombed and assess whether the walls had been breached and the men were escaping. If not, 21 Squadron, which was to follow 10 minutes later, was to repeat the attacks. In the event, he sent 21 Squadron back and they did not bomb, and he unfortunately was caught by fighters who took off from the adjacent fighter airfield. I think he stayed too long.
Pickard, who wasn't a very good low-level expert, he'd been a night bomber pilot all his life, and his navigator couldn't read a map for Charlie, didn't lead the raid. He went along as number 4 in the first lot, and took upon himself the authority to look at the whole thing after the first waves had been over and decide whether to call us in or not. And unfortunately, before he could do this properly, he was shot down by a German fighter, 190. The raid went fairly well. The walls were breached. One set of bombs went astray and hit the middle of the jail building itself, the roof, which caused some deaths, but had another effect in that where there were tight locks, the percussion shattered the bolts, and in many cases you just had to push the doors open and go out. There were a lot of wounded, I'm afraid. I suppose you'd call it an 80% success, and there were some few people killed by another couple of bombs that landed in the town itself. But nevertheless, about 200 or so got out. Oh, we could see the smoke and the clouds and the uproar. We saw people breaking out of the walls and running. Because being white, they showed up starkly. The underground movement, who were warned of this, they knew about it, were hiding in woods and copses near the jail with trucks to get people away. Although one of the people I met afterwards, he got away by getting into an undertaker's establishment, which was about 3 doors down from the prison, and they hid him in a coffin and took him out as if they were taking an empty coffin for some of the people who'd been killed, and he did get away with it. A number were recaptured in the town shortly afterwards, but I think something like 100 actually escaped. And the Germans suffered very badly in their wing, including the Gestapo chief for the area who'd been visiting the jail with his mistress, and they copped it.
I remember watching the Y plots of the German fighters on the plotting table with some concern, because they were getting pretty close. The Y plots were the radio intercepts of the control of the German fighters. I don't know a lot about the detail. I think the German fighter control at that time, at least the initial instruction, was on HF and therefore could be picked up in the UK. And we certainly got plots on that particular raid.
What visual form did the plots take?
We just had the usual plots that go on a general situation map of fighter position. I can't remember how much information we had. I think we had some idea of numbers and some idea of direction and speed, but essentially we got position plots on the German fighters.
On the way out of France, the leader of my second section, who was aborted, called me up to ask for an escort because he had been shot up and wounded and wasn't feeling at all well. So I sent my crews back individually to land at Tankmere and went back and found Hannafin, the leader of the second section, and escorted him back to Ford we landed at, where he managed to get the aeroplane on the ground. He had had a splinter of an explosive shell enter his neck just above his shoulder, and he's paralyzed all down the right side. And being on one engine, and of course the wrong engine for his left leg, he had to put his left leg on the rudder, on the right rudder, and try and fly the aeroplane, all sitting cross-eyed and across the aeroplane with his left hand. And he did very well to get the aeroplane back because conditions weren't ideal. I was shot up going to collect him. I was very lucky in that I had a shell explode in a main fuel tank on, I think it was the port side, and there was sufficient fuel and not enough air in the tank for it to quench the explosion. And so I had a great big hole and all the fuel ran out and no fire and no explosion. So I was very lucky indeed. But I only had 50 gallons left on that engine on that side. Cut a long story short, 4 of my aircraft were all damaged and were left at Ford, and only my own aeroplane and one other undamaged one returned to Hunsdon that day.
Coming up to the coast, I could see a battery, a pillbox, to the left of me, and it was firing at the 2 mosquitoes ahead of me. I turned left and let him have some cannon fire to try and quieten him. But as I turned back to go over the coast, he put a shot straight through my left wing, about the size of a roundel, about 18 inches in diameter. The wing dropped alarmingly, and I yelled to Alan Dunlop, my navigator, "Give me a hand." And he helped me with the stick, and we literally fell off the cliff down to water level. We still had to snake away changing height and speed, because they have a nasty habit of spraying bullets around the aircraft so that the water splashes up and ingests into the engine. And a Merlin engine and water don't mix.
We had been going too far westward and would have come out too close to DeHaviland, a heavily defended area, and so we turned very sharply to starboard. And as we did so, we were hit by cannon fire from the ground, which slammed into the wing outboard of our port engine. For the next few moments we didn't know whether we were flying or on our way down, and I thought Maxie had been hit and said to him, was he all right? And I said, let me have it. But he said, he sort of shouted at me, wind the trimmer. So I wound the trimmer and he shouted, more, more, more. So I wound the trimmer as hard as I could, and the wing came up, and we were then out over the sea and heading towards home. We got about midway across the channel, and number 2, his transmitter had been on transmit, and we heard the navigator say to his pilot, "Don't look now, Geordie, but their wing's going to fall off," which was very comforting as far as we were concerned.
About halfway across the channel, I tried some stalls on the aircraft, and I was having a little trouble. I was going to have a very high stalling speed on landing, so I put out a mayday call, and the group diverted me to Ford, which was an emergency airfield, and a nice long runway, and I came in very fast indeed. I may have burnt the brakes out and bent the oleos, but I still needed a ladder to get out of the aircraft. There was a crashed aircraft right at the end of the runway. I don't know whose it was.
And we landed at Ford, where our plane was looked at by the an air officer who said, "You won't be taking that any farther, it's a write-off." The next one that came in was the number 2. As he came in, his undercarriage flicked back, and the next moment he was up the runway on his belly. Titch Hannafin then came in and rolled on up the runway, going on and on and on. The engineer officer was standing with us saying, pull your undercarriage up, pull your undercarriage up. But he eventually stopped right at the extreme end of the runway, and the others came in then one by one and landed. We were debriefed at Ford. We didn't hear for a few days after the raid, and then we heard that Group Captain Pickard and Flight Lieutenant Broadley had been killed, and that Squadron Leader Magrichi from the 464 Squadron and his navigator had been shot down. Squadron Leader Ritchie was a prisoner of war, but unfortunately Flight Lieutenant Sampson had been killed.
The breached walls were 20 feet high. Through the gaps, friends of the Allies made good their escape. Nearby rests the body of Group Captain Pickard, the young man who led his squadrons to brilliant success and made sure that the RAF had paid another debt.
After the war, I think it was end of 1948 or beginning of 1949, driving through France, fairly close to Amiens, and on the spur of the moment thought I'd go and have a look and see where my bombs had gone, because my number 2 in my formation told me that my bombs had gone right into the base of the wall. And so I went and had a look at the east wall of the prison, and there was a row of 12 holes. All 12 bombs went through the wall in an ascending line from right to left, which reflected the formation pattern flow and the bombing techniques and tactics used. The holes had all been repaired, and you could see clearly the repair was clearly visible in new brick, and each hole was something like 3 or 4 feet diameter, if not more. I didn't want to hang around the wall of the prison too much or take too great an interest in it. I really want to look on the inside and see what had happened and where the bombs had exploded and what the damage and effect had been, and whether we'd got the technique right. And but I didn't dare do it, as I was in civilian clothes and thought I'd better clear out before I was arrested by the French on suspicion.